Udalale. Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. I am Carlos Chacon, your host, and I am joined by my cohorts, Eugene Meininger.
Howdy.
And Kevin Fiesel.
Hello.
And somehow we managed to make our names fall out of the grid, but that's okay. The show, as I say, must go on.
I'm living off the grid.
You're living off the grid. There you go. In the land of 10,000 lakes. Have you been to Minnesota?
No.
No.
I mean, I've been to Minnesota before, but no.
So as you get like off of 81 or whatever kind of goes down the bottom, it doesn't take very long for you to understand why they call it that. There's like water everywhere. Pretty place. Anyway, but I digress. So welcome, compañeros. This is episode 230, and today we are talking about RTO and RPO. So going back to basics, I wanted to talk about some of those pieces.
Yeah, what happens when that lake floods and destroys your data center?
There we go.
There's 10,000 of them, so you got that much more risk.
There's a lot of risk, and you have to consider what you want to do there. Okay, so as always, before we get into that, we do want to do a few shout outs. Our show notes for today's episode will be at SQLDataPartners.com/recovery or at SQLDataPartners.com/230. Let's see. So for shout outs, we've got some Twitch subscribers, right? Doug Purnell, Not Cricket One, Mama Liv, A Riley, I don't know, A Riley 2250, Selena 1352. Right. So thanks for tuning in and subscribing to the Twitch channel. So if you're interested in catching us live, we are trying to stream every other Tuesday. Today's Tuesday, right? Yeah, at 3:30. So admittedly, today we were a little behind. My fault. But again, we are here. So others who are showing us a little love on social media. Oh boy, we're live correcting the names.
You brought this upon yourself, Carlos. I don't know why you're surprised.
Let's see. Dragon Trifunovic. We've got Josh Knox, Philip Idison, Pavan Kumar Guvala, Steve Fibbich, Steve Heinmarsh, Natalie McNamara.
McNamara.
Yes, thank you. I'm like, now
yes, the foreign name, right. McNamara.
McNamara. Just doesn't roll off the tongue.
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, Carlos is doing this on purpose. He mangles every name on purpose because he knows he could pronounce them all perfectly. He's like, nah, I want these people to feel special.
Right.
There we go.
Knowing that I will personally, handcraftingly mispronounce your name.
Right. Not even in a way you'd expect.
Yeah,
if you're used to someone mispronouncing your name, by the way, LinkedIn has a feature where you can pronounce your name and you can add your pronouns so they can get it exactly right, which is a nice feature in my opinion.
There you go. That is nice. I may have to practice that a little bit, but sometimes you still hear it and you still like in your mind, your mind's decided already what this is supposed to sound like.
Sure.
And they say it and you just repeat it wrongly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well. Let's see. So Praveen Madupu, Rhonda Richardson, Kevin Hazard, Vivian Brown, Joseph Najami, Jason Hall, Alejandro Peña, Jeremy Henson, and Eric Figgins. So thank you, compañeros, for one, giving us a little love, and two, being patient as I try to thank you, right, for being good listeners. Okay. Let's see. We do have a couple of notices. So one, I guess so a little SQL Server in the news. So it's actually been a little quiet on the SQL Server front, ironically. But there's Azure services and whatnot. And in this case, we want to touch base on a Power BI topic. So earlier, I guess last week, right? They announced it in Power BI, and I actually, when I saw the announcement, I sent the link to Eugene, and I'm like, why would I do this?
Right.
I don't understand, right? And so Power BI Premium and the per seat, which I think they actually referenced as a name, right? There was some, anyway,
Power BI Premium per user.
premium per user. There we go. So the
There we go.
PPU.
Yep.
Power BI PPU, right? So they're offering the ability to be able to back up the data sets. And again, particularly because we're, our discussion today, RTO, RPOs. I'm like, why would I want to back that up?
Right. Why would you want to back up a copy of your data? Like, why would you want to make a backup of what's already a copy of your data?
Right.
It seems redundant. Like, why don't we back up the source data? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the piece of context that's important here is, if you had SQL Server analysis services on premises, you would probably back that up, right? In large part because those, it can be, not only can it be time consuming to do some of that ETL that produces the data, but you do have all the measures and metadata and everything for the model, right? And ideally, it's a situation where you have all of the source artifacts necessary to reproduce that. But when you're talking about Power BI, sometimes it verges more on Excel files on the N drive level of data governance, right? And so the thing to understand there is that Microsoft has said repeatedly, Power BI Premium is intended as a superset of the functionality you have with SQL Server analysis services. So when you hear Power BI Premium, you should really be thinking of it as a replacement for SQL Server analysis services kind of in the cloud and that sort of thing. And this is one step towards getting closer there. But then also, you want to be able to protect those models in case something were to happen and you wouldn't want to have to spend all that time trying to reproduce it, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So it makes sense for the folks that are using Premium, but with the smaller scale kind of stuff, regular Power BI Pro, like it's very likely overkill. Like the whole point is you're trying to trust the cloud and not have to worry about this stuff.
Yeah, that's what I found interesting. Is like, well, isn't that part of the Power BI service? Aren't they kind of backing that stuff up already?
Right. Well, the other thing you have to think about is you'll see in the article they talk about these XMLA endpoints, right? And so one of the features of Power BI Premium is you have these endpoints and you have ways to make changes, right? So I think there's a higher risk of somebody messing something up in a way that you didn't intend. But yeah, it to me, I think it's probably an edge case. But if you're the kind of shop that in the past would have had SQL Server analysis services, this makes a lot of sense.
There you go. Okay, well, very good. So thank you for letting us know there. As I admit, I was like, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of announcements, right? So we've talked a little bit about putting some conferences on our schedules, and so compañeros, I'm not sure how much of that you're doing. Obviously, there's still a lot of virtual events happening, right? So Past Summit this year is going to be virtual, and so hopefully that is an enjoyable experience, right? Virtual is always tough. I can let you know that SQL Trail in October is going to have an in-person element. So admittedly, this is going to be mostly for the folks in Virginia. It's going to be a fairly short event, but we felt like we needed to have something that we were prepared to have something in person. And then of course it's allowing us to get our team together as well. And so we're kind of killing two birds with one stone, and thought we'd put together some sessions. So I am 99% sure that October 21st is the date. There's a slight chance it might be the 20th, but October 21st is more than likely going to be the date. Because we again, only hesitating because of our venue. They haven't locked in. They told us it's available, but we haven't quote unquote locked, right? So we're still waiting to do that. And then we will have a virtual event the next week. So the 26th or the 28th, we're going to have a longer, again, half-day session event with different focuses each day. So we're going to do a intro to SQL day, a Power BI day, and then a SQL Server / Azure day. So again, single track idea. You come together, get to connect with folks, get to know, get to have a session, but also get to chat and, try to keep it, loosey goosey and approachable. So we're looking forward to that.
Best way to get involved with that, everybody, is to mail Carlos a satchel of unmarked $20 bills.
Yeah, it's surprising what that what that will get moving, right? Okay, so for our topic today, we wanted to we have not had this topic before, and again, in thinking about revisiting things that people are interested in. We backups are one that we've been revisiting, and I thought it made sense for us to talk a little bit about recovery points objectives and the recovery time objectives. And so first, let's jump into the recovery point objective, because the recovery time piece, I think, can lead into a slightly broader conversation depending on how we go. So when in doubt, go to Wikipedia, right? Which defines RPO, the recovery point objective, is the maximum targeted period in which data might be lost from an IT service due to a major incident.
To simplify this, there exists some time t such that there is an event at time t minus x, in which period x is the maximum allowable distance for an event.
Oh no, we're assuming continuous time and not, disjunctive or discrete units of time, right? Kevin?
Yes, and also first person who says multiverse of madness gets booted from the show.
Yeah. So that I'm not quite sure I can agree with the simplification of the definition there, Kevin.
No, but you have today a machine fails because one of those 10,000 lakes flooded.
There you go.
And so we didn't plan for it very well, and the machine has failed. The question is, how far back am I allowed to lose data? And that's what RPO is essentially telling me. How much data loss is acceptable for the organization?
Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, the organization is always going to tell you, well, none. You can't have any data loss. And then you give them the bill for how expensive it is to ensure that there is never any data loss. Because if you think about it, if I take a transaction log backup once an hour, then I can lose up to 2 hours worth of data because my latest transaction log backup might have failed. So if I take it every minute, I could lose 2 minutes of data. If I can't have any data loss, I'm replicating that to multiple data centers in a fashion which is going to require a synchronous response. And by the way, those data centers had better be in different countries, because who knows what event could happen that could take down the Eastern Seaboard. We've seen cases where, look, all of Amazon East has gone offline for a multi-hour period. All of Azure in this sector has gone offline for a multi-hour period. Azure Active Directory failed again. It's Tuesday, so of course it did. So yeah, if I can't lose any data ever, things get really expensive. And then once you show the bill of, this is how many additional zeros you add to the current IT infrastructure to get what you want, hopefully they get more reasonable and say, well, you know what? We only update the data once a day anyhow. So, all right, maybe we can lose 8 hours.
Sure.
Or we can lose this amount of time and still consider it to be acceptable, if not ideal.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because you're right. The business generally will say, well, we don't want to lose any time. However, inevitably, when I look at a lot of organizations and the way they've set their their backup structure up, they're basically allowing for data loss during the day, right? And basically only able to get back to a nighttime, right, or an overnight, type perspective.
Right.
And so they're not quite, from a data, right, that is living, right. It's not a PDF or a Word document that that's just there. I need to capture all the changes during the day, and so that recovery point does become important.
Yeah, if you're using simple database, it's like simple logging instead of a full, you're basically saying, okay, lose any data up to the last full backup, I don't care. And there are scenarios where that makes perfect sense.
Sure.
Eugene mentioned warehousing. Warehousing is usually a good scenario for this because you can get the data from somewhere else. And this is where you put in the Anakin Star Wars meme where Padme is like, you can get the data from somewhere else, right?
Right.
You can get the data from somewhere else, right? But in an ideal world, yeah, you have that transactional system where I can feed the data back into the warehouse. It would be painful to rebuild this thing from scratch. However, if I rebuild it from the last night, well, I already did that last night, so it's not that painful. It might be a few hours, but it's something that you don't necessarily need lots of regular backups of that warehouse.
Yeah, so situations may dictate, right, different RPOs depending on what you have in mind.
Right.
So the downside to that, to the keeping up with it, is we should mention that you then have to do the backups, right? So we talked about so simple versus full recovery. Is that well, it's not super painful. It's not quote unquote free, right? And I have to take care of I have to do regular backups of the log. Otherwise, the log will just continue to grow because it doesn't know when to cut it off. At what point am I okay to get rid of that stuff, right? To clean it out.
Plus, think about how far back, how many days back of backups do I need to have? And multiply that out. That's going to be a certain amount of additional disk utilization just for backups. Yeah, you can compress them and hopefully they take up a lot less space than the raw data itself, but you're still going to have to factor that in. And a recovery doesn't necessarily just mean, oh, I've still got one backup that's good, because sometimes the incident is not your data center flooded. Sometimes the incident is that somebody went and accidentally deleted all of the records from this really important table and they need to go back to it a week ago before this person deleted it and coincidentally went on vacation 6 hours later. And at that point, if you're having to pull back a backup from a week ago, well, you better have that backup. If you don't have it, you can't go back. You have an event. You have a disaster event, which is not a physical disaster, but it is still a disaster nonetheless. You have had the destruction of data that causes harm to the business. Like yokel Fred.
Yeah. And now, so this then gets into the idea of having, multiple, I want to say stages of backup, right? So something that's available to me right away, maybe I keep 24 hours or 48 hours available to me, on the network somewhere. And then I have to do, I'm backing up to tape or to Azure or, whatever other third party, device to keep a little bit more history, but it's going to be more painful to get. And there are a million different ways to skin that cat, right? One thing I guess that I will say is that, so disk is quote unquote cheap, right? So there's no excuse not to have them, because it sure beats the downside. I can tell you that, right?
Yeah.
I think we've all had bad experiences where we had a backup, yeah, Oh, yes, here's the backup from 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I could have sworn that I took a backup more than 3 months ago.
Right.
Yeah, not good, particularly when it's when it's your first time. You're just like, oh gosh. Yeah, so recovery point objective. So, Kevin, you mentioned talking to the business. I've also seen it the flip side where IT has said, oh no, we need, again, I think a lot of times, if you're moving shops, you get used to, or you have a culture or a standard that you used in one environment, and you kind of automatically assume it needs to go with you. I have a customer that's like 7 hours. That's our time. I'm like, oh, that seems like, we can get it a little lower. No,
Right.
7 hours. That's okay.
Right.
I'm like, okay, whatever. You're the one signing off on that. So having that question can be helpful, right? Just to know what it is you're taking care of, and what what SLA it is, for lack of a better word, you have to meet.
Yeah, and those are really important things to talk about on the business side, because ultimately RPO, RTO, these measures are business measures. The business people are the ones who have to come up with the answers. They're important for us on the IT side because we have to implement it. We have to ensure that we can meet these, but it's their job to come up with it. And in some organizations, you have people who take that very seriously. You have people who've done the risk analysis. If you pull in a risk analyst for an RTO, RPO discussion, A, it's probably going to be a little painful, but B, you're going to get a good answer at the end, hopefully.
Right.
And that's really what you want, because going to the business people and saying, hey, how much time can we lose? Well, without enough context, from the business side, oh, I don't want to lose anything. And then we have the money discussion where this is absurd.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Well, what is realistic? Well, I mean, I could have people fill in a day's worth of data, but again, is that necessarily realistic?
Sure.
Do you have the ability to piece back together all of this work for a day? And getting into some of the nuances of just how difficult it would be to recreate work could indicate that, well, this particular database, our RPO might actually be 25 minutes, because every 20 minutes, or let's say every 30 minutes, we send a digest of all changes to some downstream system. So I want to be able to lose no more than one set of changes. And for another system, I may only need to worry about it, say, once a day. It doesn't change very frequently, and we can easily recreate the changes. It's an annoyance, but it's not a major loss. Maybe the 25 minutes thing, that half hour sending, that may be tied to significant financial results, where if this change doesn't get out, the company loses a fair amount of money.
Right.
So this can be on a per database mindset. You may have to think about RPO differently based on your different company assets.
Yeah. So I have found that, well, is that fair? I tend to think that RPO is a slightly easier conversation to have because it's a little bit more, I don't know if academic is the right word, right? But you just talk it through a little bit.
Right.
When we get into the RTO, that then becomes a little more problematic, because you started mentioning the money, but we then have to have the infrastructure to be able to implement that, right? So in terms of the RTO, right, it's basically the amount of time of downtime that you're going to have, right? So from the point where you have a disaster to the point you can get back up, that's your RTO.
Recovery time objective.
And that is a much more difficult nut to crack in my mind, right? Because inevitably, It's hard to test for.
Yeah.
And we are generally overconfident in what we can do, right? And what's available.
Yeah, and when usually the problem is usually you have correlated failures, right? Like it's generally speaking, if you're a situation where you have a severe outage, it's not like somebody fat fingered something, but you have a severe outage. Maybe you got hit with ransomware, and it's not just okay, we need to restore this database, but like, oh, we need to restore our restores. You know what I mean? Like we're going back to a previous version of the storage backup or something like, or we have to rebuild the Windows server and reinstall SQL. And so it's not as easy to be like, well, I did a test restore, and for this terabyte of data, it took 6 hours or whatever. But it can be more complicated for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about all of the logistics around it, that was one example. Ransomware is a really good one since it's so popular these days.
Mm-hmm.
But even more prosaic things like servers lit on fire, or the air conditioning unit burst and the water pipe ended up going and kind of running water down a tarp that just happened to be driven right into your servers. By the way, that happened to my company once. It was an agency I worked at a while ago. But yeah, little tarp action ended up ruining a few servers, and those happen to be the SQL servers. So you may not have some piece of hardware readily available that, oh, well, let me just swap over to it and we're back up and running.
Right.
You've got different levels of RTO, I think, where okay, this is in the event of a fairly minor problem, we can get you back in this amount of time. If we have to rebuild servers, it's this amount of time. And if, I don't know, an EMP strike takes out half of the country. And that's where you get to the third measure, which is MTD, maximum tolerable downtime. So RTO is, where do you want to be? MTD is, at what point do people start suing you? Or do you start seriously thinking about just never bringing it back up again?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. And so, that can be, super hard, and it does get fairly pricey pretty quickly. Right. So now we have features, right? So this is where availability groups, so I guess, before. So in the beginning, it was log shipping, right? Then we took the next step in mirroring, right? Then you take another step into the availability groups. And so these are features that, make it available for you to try and reduce that RTO time, right? That's what I feel like they're all about, right? So you have some redundancy, right? You're duplicating the data, etc.
Yeah, cost and sophistication are going to be your two, like the amount of money you have, your budget and your sophistication level are going to be the two major benefits that you get in narrowing down RTO. If I have more money to spend on this, then I can have availability groups spanning into a cloud. I may have distributed availability groups, going into Azure. And then in the event that an EMP strike happens, well, at least I can flip over to Azure if I can get to a piece of electronics that hasn't been fried.
Sure.
So that's why you always keep your laptops in Faraday cages, people. It's just common sense.
Right. Also stops cosmic radiation. So it's, 2 for 1 stone.
Yep.
So, and this is where I think can be challenging, because we talked about culture, or the way you do things. The database technologies have one way, right? The VMs have a way, right? Even your enterprise architects might have a different way, and so kind of coming together. Can you hear that booming?
No.
Oh, that's good. Never mind the sound you didn't hear. And getting on the same page there, can be, I feel like it's just challenging. Again, testing, it can be difficult. And I also think it's always interesting. So we can reduce that time, but going back to the RPO, they're always like, well, we want no downtime. Even in some of these highly available features, yeah, well, super money. And I actually I should say, should I admit this? Oh boy. I have never seen a workable scenario of getting the, oh gosh, I just lost it. So the availability groups where it is, you have to commit on both nodes. Synchronous.
Yeah, synchronous.
So synchronous. I have never seen a working synchronous availability group. We always have too much lag.
Mm.
And
that makes sense.
We just can't get it to work, right? So even when you're to the point where, let's just say it's still available, but you want to do patching, right? There's always a little bit of downtime, right? It can be seconds, right? So the clusters, right? Window clusters, right? Hey, my database is always available. I can remember thinking that 40 seconds was pretty good,
right?
To get that over. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there still has to be some expectation or some negotiation, if you will, with the business in terms of, okay, well, there's going to be an outage. You're going to get kicked out, right? If you're on the system and you're doing something that we experience this failure, you're going to have to reconnect or, whatever the process is, to get there.
Yeah. And that's even if you do have, I'm moving everything up to multiple clouds. I'm replicating things to 3 different places, to different centers across the world. And we've got all of the infrastructure that we've paid for and the applications. We've got lots of different versions of applications that are all located in different places, and load balancers are spread out and everything is redundant. That's a huge amount of money that somebody's going to complain about.
Right.
And B, there's, like you said, Carlos, there's still going to be at least some small amount of time where things are flipping over, where I can't access this place, so I'm going to go to my alternative.
Right.
And even all of that nice replication, spreading out everything, still doesn't solve the problem of Fred, who went and deleted a bunch of data in a table and needs to get it back.
Right.
Unless you also do log shipping that just happens to have log shipping for at least the amount of period, the Fred period, if you will.
The Fred period.
There you go.
Man, it blows my mind that I'm assuming SQL Server still doesn't have object level restore native to it. So bad.
Or that it did.
Yeah, well, I'm working slowly on my Snowflake certification, and it's interesting the approach they take to this stuff, right? You have undrop table or whatever, but also this whole RPO, RTO, they've got 2 levels of it built in native, right? They've got time travel, which is basically, okay, what did the table look like at this point in time, either in the last 24 hours or if you're paying for a premium all the way up to like 90 days. But then they also have you've got a smoking crater mode called failsafe, where basically it's funny because they're explicit about some of this stuff, where after the time travel period is over, you've got 7 days of availability of your data, but it is on a best effort basis. And they say in the documentation, it could take days, it could take hours, it could take days, right? And you don't have access to it. You go to Snowflake and you're like, pretty please, can I have my data that I lost?
Right.
But it's just so interesting to see them thinking about this stuff ahead of time and building in 2 of those tiers right into it. And so like I said, having syntax for undrop, just native, is so nice, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And by the way, that fail-safe long period of time to get the data back kind of makes me wonder, they might be using something like Glacier for storing that data.
Would not surprise me. Yeah, would not surprise me.
Yeah, and so in fairness, right, to talk about some of the Microsoft stuff. So at least Azure SQL database, right, also offers that. Now you don't get the object level stuff. To my knowledge, there's no way currently yet to restore a table, as of this date.
Right.
but they are taking the backups for you, right? You have a certain, so they work out the increments for you, and then you have a certain time period, a certain max, and then if you want something more than that, right, then you have to figure that out yourself. You go to the next level. We also look at things. So if you're on premise and you have on premises and you don't want to buy all of your DR, right? This is where, at least in my mind, using Azure or using the cloud as a DR, recovery can make sense. So in the Azure world, right, we've got the Azure Site Recovery. It can help you do the backups and get you up and running and push everything up there, and it can help you with the VMs and all of those pieces. And that's a little bit more holistic, right? SQL Server also has some capabilities in and of itself, right, to be able to fail over to the cloud or back up to the cloud, right, restore to the cloud, things like that.
Yeah.
So again, lots of ways to skin that cat. Easier said than done, but ideally on your big systems, you're going to want to try and test that in some way, shape, or form, on a on a yearly basis, whatever that is. Just that at least you have some metrics in terms of, okay, well, is my RTO, is that realistic? Can I actually get there? So, and it's always, go ahead.
Oh, something that I think a lot of IT people don't necessarily like to do, but I think is quite useful, is tabletop exercises. Where, all right, our data center just failed. We can't get in touch with them. Nobody's responding. None of our servers are available. Now, IT people, what's happening? And trying to get them to talk through, oh, well, because we have this other data center and we have these configuration settings in place, then we can go over automatically. Until you have the one person say, oh, remember that stopped working last year and we just haven't had time to fix that. And so going into a tabletop scenario where you're quite honest and open about what the current capabilities are, as opposed to, I'm sure we got it, it'll take 1 hour.
Right.
Can open up a lot of information on where you have gaps currently in your knowledge and your team's knowledge. And by the way, one addition to the tabletop exercise, okay, well, you and you are not available because you were affected by the same thing. So you guys get to be quiet and your replacements, bring them in here and then let's see what they know.
Right. Yeah. So I can't, unless you can figure out how to make that a little more, Dungeons and Dragons, whatever. Like, I feel like those exercises have always been a little bit painful for me. I'm speaking
roll 3d12 for bravery.
Yeah. So I can't claim that they're super exciting, but right, again, it will pay off. You'll pay dividends when you do have an event, and then you've got people in your office or blowing up your Teams or your phone or whatever, right, asking for statuses, and being able to be more confident in that.
Yep,
it's worth a little bit of that pain.
Yeah, and also, like Eugene mentioned earlier, testing the times that it takes for restoring backups,
right,
on test hardware, on actual hardware. And the reason for that being, if I have a very large backup, oh, well, SQL Server says it's at 20%. Okay, well, how long is it going to take to recover? Well, it's at 20% right now, so.
Oh man, watching those text outputs is literally the worst, right? Like there's no progress bar. You're just like,
yep, with 3 levels of management standing over your shoulder.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
Lots of fun. Okay, well, I think that was again, right, so fairly basic, but also good to review, good to talk about, right, put some of that together. So yeah, compañeros, let us know, right? Any thoughts or experiences you've had in putting some of this together, getting, buy-in or feedback from the business, let us know. We'd be very interested in hearing from you. I get last thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things that I like about this conversation is when I was starting out as a DBA, it was really nice to feel like it was a tractable, manageable profession. Like when I started, I was an accidental DBA and it all felt extremely overwhelming. And it was really, really nice to be able to say, well, no, here's these targets, here's these metrics, and here's a way you can approach it. So I think it's a helpful conversation for people starting out.
Definitely.
Yeah. Very good. Well, awesome, compañeros. We do appreciate it. As always, if you want to reach out to us on social media, you can do so. Mr. Eugene.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SQLGene.
Kevin.
I used to have social media, but it fell into a lake.
Yes, he was doing his tabletop exercise and it fell off the table, and
I lost it in a boating accident.
And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon. Thanks again, compañeros, for tuning in. We hope that all of you are well, and I hope to see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.